Well, hello and welcome to episode part 2 of Making Minds. I thought since this entire series is all about minds, that it would be a good idea to talk about what exactly is a good definition of a mind. Most of the traditional definitions that you'll see in things like Wikipedia are very animal-centric. So they'll say, a mind is something which exists within a brain, and it has a will and goals and desires and emotions, so on and so forth. And while I think this definition is a useful one for a layman, I don't think it's one which really leads to a whole lot of insight about minds. I think there's a more general definition of a mind, which is going to be a lot more useful for someone who's serious about this particular field. So before I go into the particular definition, I'd like to take a short while and describe a little bit about a brain. Very high-level architecture. The largest part of a human brain is called the cortex, and the cortex is the most recent evolutionary development. And the cortex itself is divided into two hemispheres. So most people are familiar with the idea of, the left brain and the right brain. Now, each particular hemisphere is about 1 foot square, so it's about this big, and pretty thin. It's like 2 to 4 millimeters thickness. And in human brains, they're like crumpled up, stuck inside your skull, and then connected by a large bundle of fibers called the corpus callosum. A couple of 100 million nerve fibers that allow the two hemispheres to communicate backwards and forwards. Incidentally, they're not the only bundle of fibers, but they are by far the largest bundle of fibers. So because of this highly connectedness, pretty much any part of the brain can talk to most other parts of the brain quite smoothly. So for example, the area of the brain which is used for speech production is in the left-hand side in most people. And so if something on the right-hand side of your brain wants to say something, then it's very easy for it to communicate with the left part of the brain to actually speak. So once again, under normal conditions, everything's working and communicating quite smoothly. But some people have a severe form of epilepsy, and so the radical solution to this thing is actually to cut that bundle of fibers, the corpus callosum, which connects together the left and right hemispheres. And the funny part is, you'd think they would die if you did that. That's what I would have thought. But interestingly enough, if you cut those fibers, then once the patient is healed, they actually seem like a normal person under most circumstances. However, the extent of the surgery is really revealed if you do certain kinds of experiments. So for example, I mentioned that the part which actually can produce speech is in the left-hand part of the brain. And because of the way that the brain is wired, if you put an object like a flower in the left visual field, then all that information is fed into the right-hand side of the brain. So the weird part is you can show someone a flower, a split-brain person, on the left, and then you can ask them, what are you looking at? And they will not be able to say what they're looking at, because the part of the brain which knows what they're looking at is unable to speak. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't know, it just means it can't communicate it. But the interesting thing is that the right-hand part of the brain can control the left hand. So what the brain can do is it can point to another object which is the same as the one that it's looking at. So it's this kind of weird thing. It's like all the things that you could normally do when you're fully connected, you stop being able to do when you basically split the brain into two. And other funny things happen as well. So if you ask someone, for example, to explain why something has happened to them, and the part of the brain which understands the question doesn't have access to the information that the other brain has about why that event happened, that the part of the brain which receives the question will sometimes make something up in frustration. And so a lot of people basically say that in a split brain, it's really two separate minds in the same skull. And so you've got this interesting, which actually makes a lot of sense. It's basically two smaller, less powerful minds that, once connected by the nerve fiber, form a larger, more powerful mind. And this concept of taking smaller minds and assembling them into larger minds is something which I think you can take to an arbitrary level of degree. So, for example, let's just say that there's a game show, and the game show host asks the leader of one of the teams a challenging question. So the leader of the team, who's basically the spokesperson for that team, will talk to the other members of the team, and then they start talking amongst themselves and arguing, and sometimes one part will get an emotional about, no, my answer's right, and the other guy will say, no, my answer's right. And they essentially collaborate the individual minds and effectively are forming kind of a group mind. And once they come to a decision amongst themselves, the spokesperson, who's sort of acting like the speech production center, if you like, will finally say, we believe the answer is X. So in the same way that you can take the two hemispheres, you can connect them together to form a single higher level mind, I think the same thing is true of a group of people. So you take a group of individual minds, and they will form a higher level group mind. And this particular concept can be carried to an arbitrary level. So, for example, all of the people in a company form a corporate mind, or all of the people in a country form a country mind, and all the people on Earth form a global mind, and so on and so forth. And I think it's entirely reasonable to argue that every one of these minds is in fact conscious, has emotions and goals and values, and can pursue those goals. So I think the most important thing here is the fact that a mind is something which is a general concept. It's not something which is limited to an individual or a particular brain. It's an emergent property when you put together a set of smaller minds. So if you like, I would say something along the lines of any set of interacting minds is itself a mind, or has a mind of its own. Now, if you buy that, then the question is, what is a mind then? And so my working definition of a mind, and there's no official one, but I find it to be useful, is I think that a mind is something which has values and has the ability to pursue those values. And that applies from, an ant to a human being, to some alien, to a group, to a country. So that's a little bit of a definition about what a mind is and the idea of emerging minds. In the next part of this series, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of looking at a mind in that particular light. So until then, adieu.